Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Got a great story sent to me by David out of the ABA Journal, and I admit I don't read the ABA Journal, the Journal of the American Bar Association. I'm not a member. I'm a member of the Michigan Bar Association. I read that one. So once in a while I miss some stories, so thank you for pointing them out to me. But Oregon may finally join 49 other states that require unanimous jury decisions in criminal cases. I did not know this. Now, this story actually came out earlier this year, but most of us know that, generally speaking, if you've got to be convicted by a jury, of a crime, it's got to be a unanimous jury. And so a jury's got to be unanimous either to acquit you or to convict you. And if they can't come to an agreement after a certain length of time, then the jury's hung and then they have to declare a mistrial, where they can retry you if they want to, or if they think it's a waste of time, they can stop. But the point is, it's got to go unanimous either way, except apparently in Oregon. And they give an example here about an Oregon jury that went into deliberations to consider charges against Olin Jermaine Williams. And they quickly decided that he wasn't guilty of one of the two counts against him, but the second count was more complicated. Initially, the jury voted 9-3 to convict him, but the jury had a couple holdouts. In fact, they had 3 holdouts, obviously, out of 12. During the 4 hours of deliberation that followed, all 3 of the holdouts stuck to their position. But after it became clear that deliberations could extend until the next day, one holdout changed their vote simply because they said they didn't want to come back the next day. Now, you might say, well, see, but now that's only 10-2. Well, apparently, a 10-2 is good enough for a conviction in Oregon. In 49 U.S. states and the federal court system, a 10-2 vote would not have been enough to convict the man. But as this debate took place in Oregon, which is currently the only state that permits convictions for felonies other than murder on a 10-2 or an 11-1 vote. That practice has come under criticism in recent years by people who say it was enacted for racist reasons. It denies minority viewpoints on the jury and removes an important safeguard against wrongful convictions. If there's 1 or 2 holdouts on a jury, it's basically showing that the state didn't do its job to prove the case, says Professor Eliza Kaplan of Lewis and Clark Law School. And that's how our system works, and that's how it should work. The Oregon legislature is considering a constitutional amendment that would require a unanimous jury for a conviction. But the voters would also need to approve the change via referendum, and it has opposition. In particular, certain elected district attorneys oppose it, arguing that its main effect would be to increase hung juries, requiring the state to mount more retrials and crime victims to relive their traumas a second time, which is, of course, what happens in the other 49 states. Somehow, what's good for the other 49 states is not good enough for these elected prosecutors. Representative Jennifer Williamson, a Democrat from Portland and a co-sponsor of the measure, says it can be a tough conversation to have with voters. The movie 12 Angry Men is what people think of, so the idea that you have something less than that is baffling, said Williamson, the majority leader of the Oregon House. They're pretty shocked that we have a lesser standard. If Oregon abandons non-unanimous juries, it will follow Louisiana, which abolished them via referendum last fall. The Louisiana campaign focused heavily on racism, which, despite substantial differences in the two states' demographics, politics, and history, is an argument in Oregon as well. Oregon adopted its non-unanimous jury system in 1934 after a high-profile trial of Jacob Silverman for the murder of James Walker. Both men had spent time incarcerated, and press coverage of the trial was lurid. Lurid. L-U-R-I-D. You got to roll the U. Lurid. In the end, one of Silverman's 12 jurors held out for his innocence, and the jury returned a compromise verdict of manslaughter. Silverman was sentenced to just 3 years in prison. As Kaplan and co-author Amy Sack described it in a 2017 Oregon Law Review article, it was significant that Silverman was Jewish. In the 1930s, the United States was changing both economically and socially as waves of Jewish and Catholic immigrants arrived. That set off a resurgence of the KKK, which seems to have had influence in Oregon. Governor Walter Pierce, who took office in 1922, appointed Klansmen to state offices after the Klan openly supported his election. In response to the Silverman verdict, the Morning Oregonian, the state's largest newspaper, wrote that the vast immigration into America from Southern and Eastern Europe of people untrained in the jury system have combined to make the jury of 12 increasingly unwieldy and unsatisfactory. I laugh because this is something that everyone just accepts as being true everywhere, that you get 12 jurors, they decide your fate unanimously, one way or the other. And somehow it's confusing people. back in 1922 in Oregon. That narrative is disputed by defenders of allowing non-unanimous juries, who note that Oregon elected a Jewish governor in 1931. But it's not disputed that allowing non-unanimous juries was a reaction to the Silverman case. The legislature introduced the constitutional amendment within a month of the verdict, and the voters' pamphlet expressly cited the case as an example of an unreasonable juror. That juror was unreasonable to vote their conscience. The change put Oregon in an odd place, legally speaking. The U.S. Supreme Court had consistently said non-unanimous verdicts would be unconstitutional in federal court, but they were in place and apparently unchallenged in Louisiana also. In 1972, the court considered Sixth Amendment challenges to both states' systems, but ultimately rejected them. So this was one argument before the ABA House of Delegates when it passed Resolution 100B in August, urging unanimous juries nationwide. The resolution and critics like Kaplan also argue that non-unanimous juries raise the chances of wrongful convictions. There's some evidence for that belief. According to the Innocence Project in New Orleans, 13 of the 57 Louisianans who have been exonerated, and only one person exonerated by the Oregon Innocence Project, were convicted by non-unanimous juries. It's the only person exonerated by the Oregon Innocence Project was a non-unanimous. So 13 of 57, right around 20%. And non-unanimous juries marginalize minority viewpoints, critics say. That's a complaint in the Williams case where the viewpoint of the African-American holdout juror didn't affect the outcome. Asking the Oregon Court of Appeals for a new trial, Williams argued that because only about 2% of Oregonians are black, non-unanimous juries silence African-American jurors without actually excluding them outright from jury selection. Oregon could change the law on its own with the bill that Williamson has suggested, House Joint Resolution 10. In order to change the state constitution, lawmakers must pass the bill by June, and then voters must approve it in a referendum, likely in 2020. A few years ago, the measure was opposed by the Oregon District Attorneys Association, hurting its chances. But last fall, the ODAA came out in favor of the change. The organization did not respond to ABA Journal requests for comment regarding its change in position. Not every elected DA is a fan, however. Former County District Attorney Joshua Marquise, whose term finished December 31st of last year, says the issue has deeply split the DAs. Marquise was one of the 3 DAs who wrote an editorial in the Oregonian last fall opposing a change to the non-unanimous jury system. The editorial said unanimous juries would do nothing but increase hung juries. And yes, cause all the trouble they've caused in the other 49 states all these years. The one place you see these split verdicts are upper middle class white men charged with sex offenses, usually against children, Marquise says. Those are the kind of cases that juries tend to break down 11-1 and 10-2. Think of the children. Marquise says he also hasn't seen any evidence that racism has played a part in any recent wrongful convictions, but his biggest concern is that it will marginalize victims, especially victims of sex crimes. Kaplan sees it as a question of defendants' rights. Personally, if I'm the defendant, I want the state to truly prove the case. And if I'm a juror and I'm spending my time watching all this and participating fully, I want to know that my voice and my thoughts matter. So, again, this article is written by Lorelei Laird of the ABA Journal, and I will admit this was news to me. And I've been practicing law for 28 years in the state of Michigan, went to law school in California, and know a lot about the law, especially in Michigan, but a little bit about other states and so on. And I had always assumed that every state out there had gotten to the point where you're entitled to a unanimous verdict of a jury, one way or the other. Remember, it goes both ways. 11-1 to acquit you won't acquit you. Okay? 11-1 to convict won't convict you. You got to get 12 to go all the way, one way or the other. So it's a little unusual. I'm a little surprised. And the arguments, like I said, most of the arguments make no sense at all. If you simply look at it and go, gee, we got 49 states that are handling this, and they've been handling it for years, just fine. And Oregon says, no, if we did what other states did, it would cause all kinds of problems here. Why? It's not causing all kinds of problems elsewhere, is it? Or is it? So that's the situation. But Oregon may finally join 49 other states that require unanimous jury decisions in criminal cases. And I will follow the story, and if I get updates, I'll pass them along. Questions or comments, put them below. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching Lehto's Law.